Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye coverage of the 2014 elections continues with an interview with Mary Arnold of Columbus. She's a Democrat running in the 37th Assembly District. Mary, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's very nice to be back.
Thank you. Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Mary, you ran 2 years ago, but give us the short version of your bio, please.
Okay, the short version is I am a fifth-generation Wisconsinite. I was born and raised in Columbus and got my degree in Madison in social welfare. I did spend a year before I graduated working as a VISTA volunteer with Hispanic families in western Nebraska, and then I got my graduate degree, my master's of social work in California. And I have lived and worked all over the country in a variety of social work programs. My last 20 years were spent as a school social worker in Stevens Point, and 5 years ago we moved back to live in Columbus, my hometown, something I never thought I would do. But we love it. My daughter's in high school, and my husband is semi-retired, and our son is a grad student in California. And
you would consider your top issue is our schools?
I think that is one of the reasons that helped me to decide to run again. I am on the school board in Columbus. I'm the vice president. I'm in my fourth year, and as I said, I worked as a school social worker for many years. I have a real appreciation for Wisconsin public education. Before Wisconsin was even settled as a state, back in the 1840s, German settlers brought two traditions with them: beer and universal free public education. And to this day, we have great beer and we have great public education. And I think we really need to be supporting it. And I am quite concerned about some of the trends in education since the current administration has been in control.
Okay, but let's stay on schools and let's cast it forward.
Okay.
If you're in the Assembly and aid to public schools is being debated next session for the 2-year next biennial budget.
Right.
What are going to be your priorities?
Well, I would like to see the cuts restored to public education. I do think there has to be a change in the school funding formula. I agree with State Superintendent Tony Evers. He's proposed something called fair funding for schools, which I think is a really good idea. Last year there was a task force of legislators that visited rural districts, and they are really suffering, and I think it was very eye-opening for some of those legislators who didn't understand until they went around and talked to superintendents, school boards, how much rural districts in Wisconsin are really suffering with increased costs and declining enrollments. And they have difficulty attracting specialists in certain areas, especially if they're kind of more remote, in more remote areas like speech and language therapists. So we've got to do something about the inequities in funding. I'd like to see the burden taken off of property tax owners, or off property taxes. So I think there are some things we could be doing differently in Wisconsin as far as the funding goes.
A big part of this discussion is the future choices on choice and vouchers.
Yeah.
Your position on those?
Well, I'm quite opposed to vouchers. They were started in Milwaukee 20 years ago. It was an effort to try to do something about some of the schools in the Milwaukee Public District that were not doing a great job of educating kids. Unfortunately, in the last 20 years, we haven't seen conclusive evidence that they really do any better job than public schools, and they have not been as accountable. Kids in private voucher schools do not have to go through the same testing that kids in private school do until very recently. And in some cases, because of the lack of accountability, there have been some pretty disturbing cases of fraud. There was an incident, you may remember, last December where a school in Milwaukee
closed overnight.
And left families in the lurch and taxpayers on the hook. And I think the expansion of the voucher program is particularly disturbing because, of course, the money for this comes out of the public school fund, and they're suggesting vouchers be available to parents with higher incomes. And this is often presented as offering parents choices. Well, parents have choices now. They can open enroll their kids, if they're not happy with their own particular district, to other public districts in the area. We have 50 kids who transferred out of our district last year, but 100 kids transferred in. And so the choices are there. I'm not, I'm all in favor of private schools. In fact, our son attended a private school in Stevens Point for 3 years because they have a very large high school there, and he wanted a smaller school experience. We never expected the taxpayers to pick up the tab for us deciding to give him this choice, especially since there was a wonderful public school right across the street. Okay. So that's my issue with vouchers. They're not accountable and they're expensive. Okay. Yeah, I'd also have to, quote Luther Olson here, let's be bipartisan, who's a Republican senator who says we really can't afford to have 2 school districts in Wisconsin.
Okay. This summer, as you know, Governor Walker called for Wisconsin to withdraw from the Common Core standards. Your position on that?
Oh, yeah. Again, this Common Core is it's a product of a collaboration between Republican governors and Democratic governors and corporate leaders who wanted uniform high standards across the country. These are benchmarks to determine learning in English and math. Common Core does not dictate curriculum. It's as my superintendent has put it, it's a ceiling, or I'm sorry, it's a floor, it's not a ceiling. And 45 states have adopted Common Core already. So last March there was a hearing, you may remember, at the Capitol, and I think more than 300 people showed up from all over the state, mostly superintendents and school board members, and myself included. And they testified in favor, of continuing Common Core, because in our district, for example, we've spent the last 4 years implementing Common Core. And hundreds of thousands, probably millions of taxpayer dollars have gone into implementing this system. Governor Walker himself was in favor of Common Core in 2010. Now he's not. It seems as if it's become a political issue to the detriment of taxpayers, students, and school districts. Okay,
let's talk about transportation funding. You've seen the estimates that in the next biennial budget we may be $600 million to $700 million short.
Yeah, boy.
That's a rather large number.
It is.
How would you fix it?
Well, one of the things about the transportation fund is it relies so heavily on the gas tax.
Yes.
And
more than half of its revenues are from the gas tax.
Right. And now people, and myself included, are buying these cars that are much more efficient. And so we can get 45, 50 miles to the gallon on our little Ford C-Max, so we're paying less in gas taxes. And I think that's going to only continue. My understanding is that there were proposals that were put before the legislature
2 years ago.
Yeah. They included a number of different kinds of possibilities, indexing the gas tax.
Going back to, it was indexed until 2006.
Right, and going back to that, which seems to be more fair to me, and also would bring in more revenue. Raising the gas tax, toll roads, raising fees. So I think we have to look at all of these options and the pros and cons of them, and then, do something. Because it's true, this is a big problem, and I also feel that we're spending too much money of the transportation fund on new highways. We're not putting enough into existing highways and roads. And I read, I think maybe in the Cap Times today, that something like 71% of our current existing roads are rated poor or mediocre. We also have crumbling bridges. We need to look at our train tracks. And personally, I would like to see more money put into mass transportation. I continue to be very disappointed that the governor rejected the funds for high-speed rail. I thought that was a really exciting project. And in my district, the city of Watertown would have seen what was estimated to be maybe a $50 million bump in their economy because of the high-speed rail coming through Watertown. So I think, take a look at that too.
Okay. Health care. 1 in 5 Wisconsin residents get their health care from Medicaid. The American Hospital Association says our reimbursement rates are the second lowest in the nation.
Yeah.
Do you think we can afford to raise those reimbursement rates?
Well, I think we probably could have afforded to raise them if the governor had accepted federal funds to expand the Medicaid Badger Care program. I think we are now reimbursing, we are covering people who are at 100% of poverty. If we had gone to 133% of poverty, which is an income of about $26,300 a year for a family of 3, so we're not talking about a lot of money. If we'd gone to covering people at 133% of poverty, you know, we would have had more funds coming in. I think the State Journal said something like $206 million.
$206 million is what the Fiscal Bureau reported.
Right.
In the current biennium.
Right. And we used to cover people at 200% of poverty. So we moved 97,000 people, I think is the figure, they were now being covered, but we moved 63,000 parents off of coverage. And the Legislative Fiscal Bureau has estimated that we could save millions more, 260 to 315 million. And if for the years of 2015 to 2017 we were to accept the expansion, yes. And it's not too late to do that. We could be covering, I think, up to 120,000 people. It's not too late to accept federal funds. I think we really should do this. It would be good for everybody, and then we could have more money and increase the reimbursement for hospitals.
I want to ask you about things that the governor announced yesterday that he'd be seeking if he gets another term. He wants to drug test those who receive unemployment and food stamp benefits. Your position?
Well, this is going to be an expensive program to implement, first of all. Florida is one of the states that has already tried putting a program like this in place. And apparently they were kind of surprised to discover that very few of the people getting public money were actually tested positive for some kind of drug abuse. And so it seems like it's a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist. It's an expensive solution. I would not be in favor of it. Okay.
And he also wants to cut from 60 months to 48 months the period that someone could be on unemployment and food stamp benefits.
I have a hard time with that too, especially in the economy that we're in right now in Wisconsin. With we're lagging behind our Midwestern neighbors as far as economy and job growth go, and unfortunately, I think people who really suffer when you make those kinds of cuts are the kids and the families. I think there's got to be a better way. I'd like to see more money put into job training, so there'd be more job opportunities, perhaps, for some of the folks who are now accepting these kinds of benefits. And
he also said, I would like, if reelected, I'd like another cut in income taxes. Reaction?
Well, I don't think we can tax cut our way to prosperity. We've got to have revenue coming in, and the editorial in the State Journal yesterday said something about how the party is over. We can't continue to cut taxes and spend money that we don't have, thinking that things might get better. So I am frankly opposed to tax cuts until we do something about the problem with the deficit in Wisconsin. And I knocked on doors a few weeks ago, and there was a man sitting on his porch, and he pointed to the road in front of his house, and he said, I'm going to get a $46 tax cut, but that's not going to be enough to fix the pothole that I have to drive over every day, and it's too bad. The governor didn't just keep that money and put it in some kind of fund, and then fix the roads for everybody instead of sending me $46, which isn't going to help me with my problem. So.
One other thing the governor's proposed, a tuition freeze for the next 2 years at both the UW and the tech colleges. Do you support?
I do not support a tuition freeze. Again, universities and tech schools need money to operate and to offer programs to students. And while I do believe that we've got to look at the high cost of education for students, I think perhaps the way to do that is to look at helping them refinance their loans, some kinds of strategies along those lines, rather than cutting funds to universities and tech schools, which would no doubt have to perhaps reduce their programs, and then they wouldn't be available, you know, to help kids get the training they need or the education they need to go on to the next step.
The bill to legalize medical marijuana will be coming back. States of Washington and Colorado have legalized recreational marijuana. Your position?
Well, are we talking just the recreational or medical?
I'd like you to answer
both?
Both sides.
Okay, both sides. Well, I'll start with medical.
Okay.
Medical marijuana, you know, it's a little bit of a personal issue for me. I had two brothers who years ago were diagnosed with, they were identical twins, they both were diagnosed with leukemia. They went through chemotherapy. It's terrible. It's awful. They couldn't eat. They lost weight. You know, they were nauseous all the time. It's really awful stuff. And marijuana could have alleviated those symptoms. And it's, you know, it's not as dangerous a drug as many of the drugs that are on the market now. The side effects are pretty minimal. And for medical uses, under the care of a doctor and with a prescription, I'm all for medical marijuana. Okay. Absolutely.
Now,
the other side of
the recreational side.
Yes. Well, Assemblywoman Melissa Sargent is somebody I know. We went through the Emerge program together, and she and I have talked about this because she has been in favor of legalizing it. And I have not been so much, because I was an alcohol and drug assessor at the University Hospital for a program for adolescents back 25 years ago. And in those days, the two main drugs of choice for kids were beer and marijuana. Kids were smoking pot or drinking a lot. And the kids who used a lot of marijuana had many more, not that I think it's okay for kids to drink, but the marijuana users had more problems in school. They just couldn't focus, they couldn't remember, they didn't get their work done, and they skipped school a lot. So I have always been fairly opposed to that notion of legalizing it, because of course, you know, if it becomes legal, it's going to be much more accessible to kids than it is now. And there was that recent incident of a kid who had a candy bar that they found that somebody brought back from one of the states where it is legal. Okay, having said that, I read an interview with the police chief, Mike Koval, in the paper, I think on Saturday, and he talked about something I guess I hadn't thought about as much, although Melissa has brought this up to me too. Because it's, you know, it can be a felony, I think, if you even sell a little bit of it. What we're finding is that young men, especially young African-American men, who apparently don't smoke pot any more often than young white men, have been sent off. You know, the incarceration rate for them has been pretty phenomenal.
They've been prosecuted.
Yes. So what happens then? Their life, you know, their futures are so bleak if they get sent off to prison. I guess he made some really good points about, let's take another look at this. However, so I'm open to it. I'm more open to it than I think I was a couple days ago. Okay. I do think we need to really take a look at it. I'd like to study the results of what's happening in the states where it's now legal. The upside is we'd have more money, you know, tax collections, revenues would increase. The downside, you know, I'm not so sure. What kind of impact would it have on kids? Would there be more use among teenagers? Would, you know, school achievement go down? Would college kids think, well, it's fine to do this, so, you know, I'm going to get a high instead of study for my test? You know, I'd really like to look at all the aspects before we really decide or vote on anything.
First offense, drunken driving. Should it be a crime, Mary?
You know, that's another issue. I have to tell you, full disclosure here, hits very close to home for me. My dad was killed by a drunk driver 10 years ago, and it was this man's first offense. And so it's hard for me not to get a little, to take it as a, sort of a personal issue. And, you know, having lived in other states, Wisconsin is, you know, we are a hard drinking state. We like our alcohol. You know, the Germans brought the beer and the education, and the beer is good, but they also brought this culture that, an attitude that alcohol really is a part of our daily lives, and it's a way we have fun. And that's okay for most people, but there's a lot of denial associated with problem drinking. And if consequences were a little stricter for first offenses, if you got in the car and you were impaired and you thought, well, I'm going to get a slap on the wrist, or you thought, gee, I could go to jail, perhaps you would think twice before drinking when you were impaired. So I know it's going to be expensive. I mean, that's one of the issues that has come up for for people who are opposed to making it a crime for your first offense. By the way, I think we're the only state. All the other states, 49 states, it is a criminal offense.
It is a criminal offense.
It seems to me that, personally, I feel like saying that it's going to be too expensive to implement. How do you put a price tag on somebody's life?
Okay.
If my dad had lived, he was a great guy. He would have helped more people. It's so. Okay.
And finally, quickly, any highlight? You want to highlight any differences between you and your opponent November 4?
Well, last time when I was here, I talked about how we did have then and continue to have a very friendly opposition, friendly campaign, if you will. I saw John again last Wednesday night. We were at a forum together in Watertown. And we actually talked about that, about how there have been campaigns in the state that haven't been so friendly. And when I knock on doors, I'll tell you the number one, outside of the economy, the number one issue for people, especially independent voters, is why can't they get along in Madison? Why can't they agree? Why can't they compromise? And so I do appreciate that we've run this friendly campaign. I think our positions are quite different. That became clear during the forum. We do not agree on many issues, and that's fine. I think if people go to my website and then to the Facebook page and check out John's positions, they'll see that we really come down differently on most issues, and then they can make their choice.
Thank you. Mary Arnold of Columbus is a Democrat running in the 37th Assembly District. Mary, thanks for talking to Wisconsin.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks.